welcome back to, welcome, really, because this is only my second video. Welcome to Know Thyself. I'm really happy with the support, the response I got. I wasn't expecting, even though I know the tarot tube community is really welcoming, I was still surprised that I got anything beyond 5 views, and I'm just really grateful for the response, really grateful for the kind comments, and of course, you know, thank you everyone who's followed. I wanted to get into another tag. I think it's an interesting one. It's the my challenging cards. These in theory are cards that were challenging or are still challenging for you to read, interpret. This is a video response to Venus and Virtue, their video. So I first kind of wanted to just put out a disclaimer of sorts that this is based on the Rider-Waite-Smith system. So I'm not looking at the Thoth because I'm not currently studying the Thoth. I will be taking up the Thoth soon, but I imagine that as I really look at the Thoth, a lot more questions will arise, and of course I'll probably make a new video. I'll make a video for that, because I'm sure there'll be, although they're both Golden Dawn systems, they're essentially still the same deck. I think there'll be things that arise, there'll be questions that arise from that, from studying the Thoth. So this is strictly Rider-Waite-Smith, just to clarify. So these are cards that, you know, like I said, at some point or another were confusing to me, might still be confusing to me or problematic, but I think I'm going to go in order of least problematic to maybe most problematic. So there are cards that I still kind of have trouble wrapping my head around, and of course this first part is going to be focusing on the Major Arcana only, and then I'll do the same thing that Venus and Virtue did, which was do this video in installments. I'll do a second part for the Minor Arcana, and yeah, so I decided I'd sort of do a comparison as well of 3 different decks, just because I wanted to use just a classic Rider-Waite-Smith. Then I wanted to use a deck that takes a very different approach, but I think kind of distills. Okay, yeah, that's the word. There's another deck that has a completely different system, and that a lot of people think is quite hard to, a lot of people find hard to read, but for me it's very straightforward, it's very easy, it's very intuitive, and I think that deck did help clear up any remaining questions I had when I got it on the Rider-Waite-Smith. So I'm gonna put those 2 next to each other for comparison, and then I'm just gonna put also the medieval Scapini next to the 2, just to have a historical, historically inspired perspective, or just really to have eye candy, essentially, because the 2 decks I'm going to use they're not particularly eye-catching. I assume we all know the Rider-Waite-Smith. The other deck is quite, well, it's special. I love it, but it's definitely not gonna be everyone's cup of tea. So I'm gonna also place the medieval Scapini next to those 2 cards just for comparison's sake. I'm not gonna dive into the symbolism, the little details in the medieval Scapini, or we'd be here for centuries, because there's just so much that I could say about that deck, and I still haven't discovered, and I really love that about the Scapini. But I could say the same about the Rider-Waite-Smith, right, and the Thoth, I guess, as well. But yeah, let's get into it. So the High Priestess. So much can be said about this card, really. Also, I forgot to mention, I'm not going to go into the Kabbalah, I'm not going to go into numerology, I'm not going to go into any of that because we would be here forever. So I'm just going to touch on the kind of surface level interpretations, and even those are mutable, ever-changing, etc. But I'm just going to go with sort of what we would consider sort of textbook definitions. So I think the High Priestess for me was the very first card that I saw from a tarot deck, or just from the tarot, that maybe I was exposed to, along with maybe, I don't know, I think the Sun, I think, is the one that a lot of people see as well. And it intrigued me. This was before I started reading tarot. So it was my first exposure to tarot, and it was, you know, at the time, this card was so cryptic to me. It seemed like there was so much to it that I couldn't quite unlock. And I think that's the whole point of the High Priestess, right? That's the secrets that cannot be uncovered, the veil, you know, the kind of the intuition that rises from the unconscious is how I've come to understand the High Priestess. The things that we know that we don't know why we know, or how we know, and how we can never really know why or how we know them. That's kind of a roundabout way of saying, you know, the High Priestess represents intuition. Of course, in the Elemental Tarot, the High Priestess has been renamed to the Virgin. It's just, you know, I think that is kind of a loaded term, but it is just a way of expressing, I guess, the yin aspect of the, well, you know, it's the sort of gendered term for it is the female principle, the yin, but we can just replace that with the passive or the receptive, as this says, of course. So yeah, the idea of the Virgin Priestess, the Virgin Mary, Isis, that's kind of the idea behind the card. But at first I was really intrigued by the two pillars, of course, Boaz and Jachin, however you pronounce them, you know, the pomegranates, the sea, the moon, everything about this is meant to be cryptic, right? I think this is kind of the beginner's guide to tarot, right? That you can't, it's a reminder that you can't know everything. You're not supposed to know everything. There are things beyond the veil that you cannot know. And I guess that is a little frustrating as a tarot reader, because you kind of want to peek beyond the veil. You want to peek behind the curtain. You want to know everything there is, and you can't. Sometimes you just have to accept and surrender to the fact that you can't know everything. You can't predict everything. You can't have insight about everything. There's just going to be things that you don't know, and you have to surrender to that. And I think the High Priestess, at least on a surface level, represents that. I think the High Priestess as an archetype or as a character, of course, holds the key to those mysteries, is the gatekeeper, is I think is a good word for. I think the High Priestess is more of a gatekeeper than the Pope is, or the Hierophant. Touch on that later, but yeah, this card is very confusing for me. Very cryptic. And now, because of relationship I've developed with this card and the archetype, and also sort of deity work related to this card pops up for me a lot. So it has added significance. It's taken on a new layer of meaning and symbolism that I didn't expect it to take on. But now, of course, I can't not read it that way, because of my own personal spiritual experience with this card, my own spiritual understanding, and my own associations with the High Priestess, and my sort of relationship with deity, specific deity. I won't go into that today, but yeah, I think this was the first card that was the most cryptic to me, but was almost immediately decoded, but on a surface level, right? Once I formed this kind of relationship with it. So that was the High Priestess. So next we have the Hierophant, or the Pope, and it is confusing to me still. I mean, I get it, I do. I think it still can be, still is a confronting image for a lot of people, especially people who come from a more religious, dogmatic background like I did. I have a Catholic upbringing. I still am very submerged in that kind of Catholic culture. So this image, I understand this image can be triggering or confronting to some. It can be kind of shadowy. But yeah, I think what confuses me still sometimes about this card is not the actual image, not the actual representation or the archetype. It's more so when the Hierophant comes up in a reading that I wouldn't expect it to, right? Because I think on the surface level we still associate it with, well, you know, the Pope. In the Scapini, it's just called the Pope, which was historically, that was the figurehead that was represented in this card. So I think what confuses me sometimes is what the Hierophant could be referring to when it comes up in a reading where it has nothing to do with religion or spirituality even. So I kind of try and break it down. I think of dogma, I think of the status quo, I think even of society to a certain extent, although I know the Emperor covers that aspect as well, that domain. But I just think of the established way, the rules of society, the morals, but the kind of morals that we've adopted, that we've taken to be devoid of any sort of religious connotations, but of course they have derived from religion. They are, we have those kind of moral laws thanks to Judeo-Christian religion. We can't disengage from that aspect, right? We can't disconnect it from Christianity. So, there's that aspect. But it is confusing sometimes. It just seems irrelevant when it comes up in a reading where it just has nothing to do with those things I've mentioned. But another way to look at it is the title, the very Golden Dawn-esque title of the Hierophant suggests a teacher, a bridge to the divine, a spiritual or religious keykeeper, an interpreter, so almost a middleman is a very mundane way of interpreting it. Someone who interprets an interpreter. So that's one way of looking at it. And then I think the other way that I try to interpret it when it comes up in a reading where, it kind of confuses me is that maybe I need to learn something from that reading or experience, or I need to unlearn something, right? There may be kind of things that are beneficial for me to adopt, and there might be things that I need to unlearn, that are shadow aspects for me. You know, of course, they don't necessarily have to be related to religion, but I think religion is kind of the source of all that guilt. I feel like in a lot of Western society, religion is the source of, well, I mean, the reason I really wanted to use the Elemental Tarot is because the keywords or the messages that come with the Major Arcana just sums it up so well. So, belief. It says, I'm sinless, and the root of all sin derives from me. So we only really, this is an interesting interpretation because belief only works so much as we give power to it, right? So the concept of sin, the concept of morality only exists, well, it only works because we give credence to it, because we believe in it. Belief works much in the same way. So really, something that we don't believe in is something that we don't give power to. So I think the Hierophant is also about power structures, maybe giving your power away to something, surrendering your power to someone or something, an institution maybe. So I think it's interesting that belief is the key word for the Hierophant in this card. And of course, they're also, the figure on this card is also kind of standing on these two blocks that kind of have, that kind of represent polarities, right? So kind of white and black thinking, or maybe polarizing or extreme thinking, and then maybe more nuanced thinking is how I interpret that. And of course, the sheep represent the flock, the followers. Especially in Christianity, that imagery is very present in Christianity. So I think that's why that was probably included. But you know, as sheep, we kind of blindly follow the things that we put all our belief into. Sometimes we don't question those beliefs. We just follow. And I think there's a certain hubris in that, right? I think that's what this figure is supposed to represent. I think the Hierophant or the Pope can also represent hubris. I don't know. I think it can represent when divinity passes through the lens of humanity, something gets lost in translation, essentially. Especially if we have someone interpreting these doctrines for us. So we have to be careful about who we follow, who we listen to. We have to be critical, we have to be discerning, as always. We should even be critical of our own beliefs, I think. We should constantly re-examine our beliefs, and we should think about whether they serve us or if they maybe are harmful to us, they no longer serve their purpose. So I think that's what I think about when I look at the Pope. But it's definitely a confusing card at times, problematic, definitely. So yeah. Okay, so we're going to speed this up a bit here because this has already gone on for far too long. The Lovers. This also came up in Venus and Virtue's video. This was the first card they spoke about. So I'm just going to refer to my notes so that I can get through this quicker. And then I think what I'll do is I'll do one more card, which is Justice, and then I'll split this video into 2 segments just because I don't want to make it overly long. So yeah, I hope that works out, and then I'll do another segment or segments on the Minor Arcana I think that'll work out nicely. So yeah, let's get on with the lovers. So we talk about choice a lot when we speak of the lovers, but more than choice, I think it represents free will. And these may seem like interchangeable terms, but if we look at the Rider-Waite-Smith imagery, right? So yeah, we see Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. I see them not only choosing each other, because it's not like they have any other options. It's not like in the Marseille where the card is named the lover and the figure is choosing between two potential spouses. Here they only have each other, and they're choosing between each other, but they're also choosing between this burning tree on the right, which I'm still not completely sure. That tree is still a mystery to me. I think it represents the tree of life, the path up the tree of life or down the tree of life, I don't know. So I don't know, the right hand path, the path of God, wisdom. I've seen multiple interpretations. And then the left hand path, I guess, so the left side, the tree of knowledge, the serpent, temptation. And here they are free to choose. So the key detail here is that when they choose, they commit, and every action has a reaction or consequence. I think it's through the existence of free and true will. They're slightly different concepts, but stay with me here. I think this is when the ego or the identity develops, when we have true will. We have at least the illusion of choice, that we are individuals that can make choices for ourselves. So we can say that the Chariot represents the ego drive. And then in more Jungian terms, the Lovers also represents a sort of marriage of opposites, and we see a tiny little symbol here of the sun and the moon. It's kind of like the yang and the yin. Yeah, it's kind of like an alchemical process, an alchemical fusion. I mean, I'm really not well versed in alchemy yet, but it's the union of opposites. It's the marriage of opposites within the self to reach the higher self, right? We can understand this. We can maybe interpret the angel as the higher self. I think my main hang up with this card still is that at face value, the title, so the Lovers, still has a lot of other connotations, and I still read those connotations before I see the idea behind the Lovers. At face value, I still see this. I see the title before I really think about the image. So I think it's one of those cards that's harder to divorce from the conception we have of, I mean, even just the word lover. And then of course it's harder still to pull this card for other people, and not have them understand it as a card of romantic love. It's difficult to explain everything that I just mentioned when you're reading for other people. You kind of have to summarize or explain it in other terms. So Lovers is still problematic in that way. Okay, so let's move on to Justice. So Justice, this last one is going to probably be the briefest segment, because I'm not even going to really talk about it, because I want to develop another video. I want to dedicate another video to the concept of justice, because this year for me is a justice year, and by that I mean that sort of through numerology you calculate, it's kind of like calculating your birth card, but with the current year. So for me this year it's justice, and as justice keeps coming up for me in a lot, if not of most of my readings, it's constantly redefining what that card means for me. So I want to make a separate video on this where I explain what I mean by a justice year, because I'm still figuring that out, what that means. For now, I'll just say justice is not as straightforward for me as it may seem to others. So there we go. So thank you if you've gotten to the end of this. Thank you for watching. If you've reached the end, comment below your thoughts. What are your most challenging cards? And they don't have to be from the Rider-Waite-Smith. They can be from any deck, really, or any system. I'm really curious to see and hear your feedback. So yeah, that being said, thank you. Remember, to love yourself is to know thyself.